Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Thank you for joining us today. You are watching our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion show, hosted every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Please make sure to visit us at joinmayshad.com to learn all about our upcoming programming and how you too can become a member in helping us to revolutionize how women connect, engage, and do business together. This is a very, very special show today because number one, we have an incredible rock star powerhouse woman with us today, Jennifer Owens. Hi, Jennifer, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I love to hang with you guys.
See, it's already fun. And this also marks the launch of a joint collaboration between Jennifer and her company and Mayshad, the Healthiest Places for Women to Work. And this is an initiative that's very near and dear to our hearts, something that Jennifer and I had started way before COVID. But now we're finding that more and more each and every day that passes, the work that we're doing now is so much more inspired by what we're all experiencing in the pandemic. I would like to bring onto the stage again, Jennifer Owens. Jennifer is the founder and president of Jenwork. She formerly was the SVP of Digital Strategy for Healthy Women. And you may remember Jennifer from her days at Working Mother Media. Jennifer is the co-founder of the Working Mother Research Institute. Hi, Jennifer, welcome.
Hello. You may remember me from such performances as, so.
And we promise this is going to be educational and informative and fun. So,
yes. Who doesn't want to have fun with diversity? Let's do it.
So please, for everyone who's out there watching this today, please make sure to type in all your questions and comments. We're here today to talk to you about the work that we're doing together to help companies be inspired and reach greater heights in the sense of how they promote and champion and reach equity for women in the workplace and what it means now going forward, given the fact that we're in this global pandemic. So we're going to talk a bit about what our project means and what it is and what we hope to inspire and how you too can become more actively involved and engaged in the work that we're doing together. So we launched Healthiest Places for Women to Work. Launch right now, yay! And, one of the reasons why Jennifer and I did this together is that I have a healthcare background myself. Jennifer has a healthcare background herself. And the more that we got to know each other through our years of networking with each other, we also realized that there's a tremendous need out there for the way in which companies really, truly do think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what we realized is that many companies were checking things off of a box and therefore reifying many of the silos that they had originally intended to decimate. And the work that Jennifer did for many, many years at Working Mother Media and then at Healthy Women really went above and beyond to identify in the corporate space those companies that were really excelling in very specific ways. So the work here that we're doing now is meant to inspire companies who may have been trailblazers in the past, but are now really having to step back and think through how are they addressing gender-related issues in the workplace, as many of us are still remote working and may be doing so for a very, very long period of time. But then also, how can they be ahead of the curve in moments and times where there's tremendous uncertainty and fear and anxiety for everybody involved? So Jennifer, I'm going to turn the mic over to you now. Talk to us a bit about talk to us about what this project from your perspective is intended to accomplish.
Well, I think, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the mic. It's very exciting. So I think that, there is an aspect of this that is competition. The history, my longtime mentor, Carol Evans, who is part of the team that launched Working Mother many years ago, like 40 years ago, she came up with this idea to have companies compete to how well they were supporting working mothers. And so, they compete on revenue, they compete for market share, they compete for, stealing the best talent. Could we get them to compete on how they were treating this new cohort of professional women coming in the workplace? So, and that's always there. And that's what we want to do in terms of women's health. We want to have them compete on how well can they treat women's health, mental health, emotional health, of course, the physical health. Like, let's start with, what are we doing in terms of health insurance, but also social health. And something that we've been talking about is psychological health. Health in the idea of, do you feel comfortable stepping up to say you see something wrong? And do you feel you'll be punished for it? And that's part of the health too, is your employee voice. And so what's been interesting is, we thought about this, about competing on women's health to start. And then it turned out that every company is a health company, that all of the companies, that we realized how important health is to our economy, to our labor force, to our, of course, to our families, to ourselves. And that since we're spending so much time in these companies and giving so much of ourselves to these companies, they have a really deep impact on all of this, on everything that we do. So here comes COVID. It turns everything we were thinking up to 11. And so there's a competition part of it. But as you can tell, there's a conversation part of it. So there is, what are the companies that are doing a great job? Obviously, that's the competition. What are the best practices? What's actually working? Because we could dream up a gazillion things that, we shall all enter the workplace wearing bubble suits and never touch, so what's real? But also, what do women themselves want for safety's sake, for health's sake, for their mental health, for all these pillars that we're thinking about in terms of health? What is that conversation? And then the final leg is, where are the opportunities for change? So we identify the best practices, but if you're going to have best, I guess the corollary is worse, but maybe not as good as it should be. And so what's the opportunity for change? And what should that change be? How should it manifest? And so that's the three: the competition, the conversation, and the opportunity for change.
Jennifer, and one of the things I think is really, really very thrilling for me in the work that we're doing is that, this is probably, oh my gosh, maybe 4 years ago now, where I was 4 years ago, back in the day, attending a technology conference and was listening to a panel hosted by a bunch of VCs. And even at that moment in time, one of the VCs on the stage said, I'm interested in funding those entrepreneurs who can come up with solutions that help to fight loneliness and isolation, because we at our firm know in the next 2 decades, this is going to become a major financial burden on our economy, right? Wow. And so even then, there was the tide that was turning, just in the sense of, how are we really valuing mental and emotional health and wellness back then? Fast forward now that we know that there are so many different things that are happening all at once. Right. And so you see, we often in the old days would talk about, loneliness and isolation that we'd feel by too much reliance on technology. Yeah. Well, surprise, surprise. Now we're in front of technology 24/7, 365 days a year. God, is it going to be 365 days a year? And so there's that. And, what does that do in the sense of, the complexity of that? Because now, you and I are communicating and we relate online. We haven't seen each other for months and months and months now. Right. Maybe just months. And so how we think about, just the human interaction, the human connection, that's so critical, but we're using the flat world to be able to house many of those relationships that we had in the physical space before. And we also know that in this period of time that this is even more intense for women, because women are bearing the brunt of responsibilities now in the home as well, right? In the sense of dividing how we think about the professional world and the personal world. It's really all morphed because we're all under one roof now, living and working, but we know that there's an extra burden on women. And the reason why I bring this up is that, Jennifer, when you and I have been talking with different entities, different companies, different people, they ask us, why women? Why aren't you doing this for everyone? Right. So let's talk a little bit about that too. Specifically, why do we know that doing this for women under this context, under this project, is the right thing to do?
Well, first, in my mind, burnout is very real. It was a problem before COVID. It's becoming even bigger problem after, with all these added burdens that you're talking about. And HR folks were talking about it years ago. They've known that if we're always on, we're always on. And then, yes, you add in all those burdens that are leaning much heavier. The mental load is much heavier for women than it is for men, and especially when there are kids involved in the mix. So why women? That's one reason. Secondly, simply put, Mayshad is working with women. I mean, men can get their own Mayshad. Oh, did I say that?
But Jennifer, we actually have Mayshad men.
We do.
We do.
He'll do us. Well, but here's the thing: to find out what's happening for women, you're going to have to find out what's happening for all employees and thus men. So yes, the title of it is, best companies for women's health. But we'll also know what's happening with men. You have to know, we're going to be looking at what the programs are that are being offered, who has access, and who's using them. So back in the day when I ran Working Mother Best Companies, you'd see men were using flexible work options at the same levels, like in the 70% as the women do. And so that was an important stat. You had to know the men's stat to understand the context of the female stat. So that it's, we're calling it one thing, but it is, it's actually both. But also, to be hardcore, when we're looking for publicity about this and we want to have the conversation get out there, focusing on women's health as a point to kind of take that water hose and bring it down gives it more energy out of the hose, because we can talk to general media and we can also talk to women's media, and we'll have the men's data. If the men want to cover it too, then that's awesome, and we will have all kinds of customizable data that we can share with them. But it's a bit of a marketing thing too. And then in the end, we know that women have an outsized role. To go back to what you were saying before, one of the positives is women, we used to call them the chief medical officer for their families. So how women's health goes, so goes everyone in the family. It's what we know. Every study shows that. So, and I know that if I'm sitting on the couch, it means everyone else is going to sit on the couch. And if I'm getting up and everyone else is going to move around, it's exhausting. But let's not go there. So,
well, it's so interesting what you're saying, because what we find is that there's so many different things that are happening at this moment in time in our world, like the pandemic, obviously, but then there's also in this moment in time that I think people and communities and companies are really also starting to understand the interlocking nature of all the social justice issues that we're being faced with right now too, knowing that diverse companies just perform better. And knowing that right now, in particular, and we've known this for 10 years, but we were talking about this on one of our other diversity, equity, inclusion shows. We've talked about this in great lengths at our Women and Money shows, that many mutual funds and investment funds that are dedicated to social impact investing are actually now outperforming the S&P 500. Yeah. And even though they have been doing so for 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 years, but there's something about this moment in time that's bringing more heightened awareness to it. Right. Coupled with the fact that you have, women are going to inherit 70% of all inherited wealth in the next 20 to 30 years max. Yeah. And that's about $72 trillion. So you have so many different things happening all at once, just in the sense of the wealth transfer.
When you say leaky pipeline, it's women who are leaking out of that pipeline. So if it's lack of childcare, if it's never-ending burnout, if it's I see no advancement for myself, all these things, health is a major part of what keeps us in. If we feel valued, if our emotional health is strong, if our social health, we see a network that's helping us, if we feel our voice is being heard, our psychological health, if we ourselves are feeling better, our mind is feeling clear, well, then we can take on any challenge and we're resilient. If we're not, we're going to start looking for the exit. And that's often what happens. We're not going to get into this with this, well, you never know, but financial health, and the need for family health, like your child care demands and all that. You could go everywhere. That's the other thing, is that health is like water. It goes everywhere. So we do need to have some parameters, or, as someone who, got an application down to 650 questions, and it was like, we don't want that. We want it to be something where we're asking the right questions, getting the right data, and to fuel a conversation without letting it spread, because, what is it? If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. We need to we're gonna have to make some tough choices when it comes to, everything we ask them.
And we promise for all of you watching out there, we're not doing 650
Yeah,
questions on the assessment.
that's a true story. Carol Evans asked me to cut 100 questions. I cut 150, and we got to 650 questions.
It's interesting too, as we think about, Jennifer, when we mentioned at the beginning of the show, like when you and I first started talking about doing this, COVID wasn't even, there wasn't even one positive test yet.
Right.
And so there were companies that were already doing really good things in the sense of how they champion and promote women's health in the workplace, right? And more so than just checking things off of a box, which many companies have done as a part of their CSR platforms or their ERG programs or whatnot. But I'm wondering, in this period of time, and who knows what we'll find. That's why we're inviting a lot of different types and sizes of companies to apply as well across diverse industries. But there are companies that were already doing really good things that may have been completely rattled because of COVID. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, like, those best-in-class companies that were really championing women's equity prior to this, those that have really been able to pivot and reinvent themselves and to re-engineer and to launch something new, right? Or come out of it on the other side. Or maybe those companies that were struggling that are actually using this moment in time to think through, wow, this is really our opportunity to do it differently.
Yes.
Right. And so I think we'll see companies at different points of their life cycle in the sense of how they're responding to this moment in time and what that means then for how they move forward.
Yes. And how many of them will try to move backwards and get back to normal? We also, I'm sure many of us saw the story with Florida State University last week saying, so you can't work and care for kids at the same time, which, immediately was like, what are you talking about? So I think that's an example of an employer like desperately saying, can we just go back to the way it was, where you didn't tell us you had problems and we didn't worry about these life problems? We, for sure, I mean, we've blurred our backgrounds, but we can see that the backgrounds are there now, and there's just no faking it. And I think health is one of those things. When we did surveys at Working Mother on certain conditions like multiple sclerosis, we did one on visible and non-visible disabilities. There's a lot of stress out there for people who have non-visible disabilities where they're covering. By necessity, they feel they can't be open. They can't say I'm having a flare. I can't say that I'm having a migraine day, and they try to push through because they don't want to look somehow judged, and seen as not committed to their work. The same things that women with small children have. So these health things. Let's all hope we can bring our whole selves to work. And so that's what we're going to be looking at with this initiative is what are the best strategies for bringing your whole self to work and wanting to hear what people have to say. I want to be a great employee. I have this one accommodation. Could you get, and the accommodation might be, I don't want to be answering emails at 11 p.m. Shouldn't be considered an accommodation, but we all know that there are places where, hey, I emailed you an hour ago. It's 2 a.m. Why didn't you email me back? Like that kind of stuff. That's mentally taxing.
Well, and that brings up a really interesting point as well in the sense of the official written rules or policies and procedures or the employee guidebook or whatever is really officially written in stone versus then what is the cultural sense of belonging and identification that people have with their companies in the sense of, in what ways are there, in what spaces and places are there disconnects between really what are the official policies and then how those policies are actually lived out through the employee experience. And that's really what this is about, is truly the employee experience.
Yes. And honestly, we won't have an employee survey part of this. And because it's very hard to have companies come to you and say, let me give you all my employee emails, or let me push out so realistic. So it's very quantifiable. We're asking, what do you have? Yes, no. What are you offering? Drop down. Who has access to it? What bands of employees? What's the usage? Because you know your usage numbers. So that's where, the rubber hits the road. Now, so say they say all these things and then they go public with it. this is where the sunshine approach, you give the numbers, you say that the company said this, and we aggregate some data, we call out some important data points as part of the storytelling about this. Well, that's when, as someone who did this for 10 years, if you're not actually doing it, I'm going to get a call. So, and honestly, didn't happen very often. It was a very rare thing because companies they know their public reputation is based on it. So while it would be lovely to have both sides at the same time, you can only really do one. And yet talking these numbers publicly has great impact. It really reverberates because also that's where we come back to the competition. There was a year where at Working Mother where one of the professional services companies hit like 15, 16 weeks of parental leave just across the board because they often divided up for women, maternity, paternity, and adoption leave. And they would have 3 different numbers. And this one company came in and said 16 weeks or 18 weeks across. And that number kept going up. And so they all saw that. And immediately there were, and you just sit there going, yes, this is exactly how this is awesome. So can we do the same thing on key health concerns? How awesome would that be? So that's what I hope.
So Jennifer, also, I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about how you bring your whole self to the workplace, because that right now is going to be so critical and so key because we're still at the individual level, kind of all over the place in the sense of how we're experiencing this. And we know at a macro level, women are overrepresented in every single industry in unemployment claims, for example.
Right.
And we know that women are doing the double shift right now and even more intensified because for many different reasons. And we also know that, once we go back to work, there's a fear of, the office politics in the divisions between who is at the office versus who's left at home working, right? And then how do you incorporate that sense of belonging and inclusion and cultural assimilation into how you actually work? We're also at a moment in time in this country of tremendous social and cultural change from a race relations perspective as well.
Yes.
And so we also are very sensitive to the fact that not all women are experiencing the same exact things under any circumstance right now, even on a good day, given the fact of what's happening right now. And we also see this as a huge opportunity to want to do things differently, right? And our responsibility in ensuring that as for ourselves as employers, as leaders, as managers, as, Jennifer, you and I, and the working committee that's a part of this too, that we're all part of a larger systemic change.
Yes.
So, I think it's really important that, we, tell our audience, the ways in which, identity is complex.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not just women, but we're women across very different races, classes, ethnicities, sexual orientations, ages. And the work that we do
situations, right?
Exactly.
Because I constantly, you'll always hear me talking as if I'm talking to everyone who has kids. I just, and as my kids have gotten older, so has my point of view, so you all have teens now, so, and it's a constant effort is to, and so that's always my first point of reference because that's my point of reference. But yes, women's health, that's what's so exciting about it is that there's no limitation, right? Except for the men. I'm sorry about the men. We'll do something for the men later. But that it's all stripes, it's all colors, it's all highs and lows and everyone. And that's what's so exciting about it. And that constantly the conversation has to keep going. And you know what? I'll tell you, we're not going to get it right anytime. We're going to find there are things we put out into the world and we'll think, oh, why didn't we ask that question? And that's the exciting part of it. We'll try our dangest and then every year we'll reopen it for reconsideration. Every note we hear from people from company side, from the women's side, that's the conversation. Hopefully we'll start it and it's never going to end. It's going to be ongoing.
And I think it's such a good point, Jennifer, because it's also going to be very evolving as well. Like in this year number one, I can't believe that I'm saying this, but just physical safety in the sense of how we even get to work.
Yep.
The way in which employers make us feel safe and secure within the physical workplace, or if we're continuing to work from home, is going to be paramount this year. And I think particularly of concern for women because everything we experience it a bit differently for men, right? And so you think of like how we use common spaces, or how we use the office, or how we commute back and forth, or how we use the restrooms.
I'm just going to say, I mean, I know it's a little indelicate, but how we use the restroom is different, you know, and also we tend to have way more caregiving duties for for our parents, for our partners. We have a lot, and our pets, you know, that like we have a lot of caregiving going on in our lives, and yes, and so we feel it acutely. Not to say that, you know, men aren't caring for their parents or their partners or the like, but by and large, women are, and we can feel that. We also have the stress of trying to convince our mothers to put the mask on, but that's a whole down the road. Mother does a great job. She really does. But yes, it's a lot on us to be thinking, and so, you know, may we be blessed with cutting all those questions very soon. Right? May physical safety be a given, you know, the next time we do this. That will be the hope. So let us prepare to evolve on that score.
Jennifer, one of the things I think is really interesting about the work that we're doing too is that we're not just there to say, okay, here's a group of winners, right? So out of the thousands of companies that apply to be a part of this assessment, there's obviously going to be, you know, X number of companies who rank in the top, whatever that is, whatever the X is, and then those who aren't going to be in the top this year for the first year. And opportunities to actually help those companies from the benchmarking data that we'll have access to throughout the process, to help companies understand where they really fit in comparison to everybody else, and then truly what could they do from a longer term relationship with us, in the sense of us together helping them become a better place for women's health.
Yeah. Right. And also, and then the ones that make it into whatever the, you know, part of it, they will have weak spots, you know, and so they will want to know that. And also, it'll be interesting to see what's so strong, because also those who don't make the list may be really strong in one area in the various pillars that we're going to be looking at. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's a conversation that's happening. We just want to wrap our arms around it and shine a light on it and make it actionable. So, and we will.
We talk a bit about, so we're looking at very specific different areas, right? We're looking at benefits, policy, safety, culture, belonging, support. And knowing that, you know, what we find in year number 1 may be very different than what we find in year number 3 or number 4, hopefully, right? Like, hopefully we're not worried about how to go back into the city anytime soon. But also, you know, in the sense of really, truly what's innovating in this space as well, as it pertains to everything from, you know, really think outside the box ways for employee engagement to, you know, to benefits and perks, and understanding, I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of the conversations we've had with the Mayshad ecosystem, and we've had hundreds outside of all the shows and the workshops and the brain trust sessions that we do, but each one of us at Mayshad have had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with women in the last few months. Again, all professional executives, business owners, entrepreneurs. But I think what's really interesting is the fact that we're not all experiencing this at the same time. And there's a constant blurring of the professional and personal, right? And so we may be in the past, that was always a tension point, right? Like, how are companies really enhancing the division between life and work, right? And ensuring that employees really felt like they had some sort of life outside of work, right? That was the whole division debate. But now, you know, we're accepting the fact that it kind of all morphs into one. And are there ways where companies can really, you know, value employee recognition and contributions outside of that binary? So it has to be this or it has to be that, right? And I think we'll see some really innovative things come from, you know, from that assessment.
View thing, you know, that's the, like, I hadn't thought about that it's going to impact performance reviews, because all those, you know, goals we set last whatever cycle, well, now you have to take that into consideration when you have those conversations as to what, you know, if your goal was to put on 3 live events, you know, in person, That's not happening, and it's going to change every conversation that we have. And it's just funny. It's funny how you and I talk, and we'll talk to someone else, an expert. We have a group of folks that are helping us in various aspects to give all their good, brain power to us. And they bring up some new, like, mind-blowing thought every single time. And they don't have to go that far. It's never, that outside the realm of, sci-fi or something. It's very basic. And you think, yes, it impacts that as well. So we are looking at, the basic foundation of looking at benefits and policies. Are you offering paid time off? Are you doing employer-sponsored health care? Who's allowed on it? Are you doing flexible work? I founded National Flex Day like 8 years ago. It's the second Tuesday in October. Everyone should celebrate it because I believe flexible work helps everything. So that's really that's my point of view. It's in there. We're looking at hygiene and safety. Like that, that was the big moment of, your protocols and your testing, your social distancing rules. Worker protections if people aren't following those protocols. HR doesn't want to take this on. Like, who's taking this on? If the guy next to me is wearing PPE and the other guy's not wearing a mask, like, how are we handling basic? How are we cleaning? How are we dealing with the air filters? How are we dealing with safety? And we're looking at safety, remote safety. We're back with the Zoom bombings. Are we feeling like harassment happening? I'm sure, the harassers are still finding a way to harass, even virtually. And then we're looking at culture and belonging. That's where all this that Jan's talking about, you can have every policy in that, like, hygiene and safety part, but how does it manifest in culture? And what happens? I'm always fascinated by what happens when they're not following the rules. In terms of, when it blossoms into harassment and assault, but also just, back in my working mother days, no, I'm not following the remote working rules. I'm not going to allow it. Showed you, everyone can work remote. They were also looking at, in terms of culture, it's like, what work are you doing to train your managers? Because they're always your front line on making any of this work. How do you empower them? How do you make this not just added stress in their life, but actually show how it benefits them, and then support them if they have problems in doing all, because these poor people, a whole bunch of rules are, there's life rules and then there's workplace rules are like crashing on these people who then feel compelled to help with the emotional state of their employees and the mental state and all that. And they aren't responsible for that. They're responsible for productivity, and so, you can't make them be the be all get all. So how does the employer as a whole create a culture for that? And then how do you communicate it? How do you take feedback in? How do you over communicate it? I'll say it twice, because you can't just put out a rule once and then say, we're in it. That's check the box activity right there. We know from all the work that still needs to be done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it's a never-ending bunch of work. It can't every day. It's an everyday, every moment thing, and it has to have the policies, it has to have the protocols, but it also has to have the culture of support, pro and con. When the con happens, how does your culture react to it? So we're trying to organize all this thinking that we've been hearing from folks and kind of, make it. And of course, the pillars will hold only so much, and some stuff will fall off the pillars and push it back up. But that's how we're trying to organize our thinking right now. That said, we're completely open to other ways of thinking about this, right?
Absolutely, Jennifer. And, I keep going back to a couple of different things you just said right now, particularly around the emotional and mental health and well-being of employees, of women in the workplace. Yeah. And we know that because my mind was thinking through, a show that we did with Dr. Risa Reiger on domestic violence during COVID. Yeah. And, the ways in which employers now could use this time to become even more supportive to the extent that they can in offering availability to different types of resources for women that may be experiencing less than ideal situations or circumstances within the home too. And, to a point that you made earlier in our conversation, then, the stress and strain, how is that showing up in how we come to work, right? And how productive we are and how efficient that we are, and just how do we think of ourselves as bringing our whole self to work when we're not honestly all mentally there sometimes, right? And that could be for a variety of reasons, but as we know, that domestic violence numbers are just soaring during this moment in time.
And what we want to keep to ourselves. We always talk about bringing our whole self to work, but sometimes, you don't need to know everything. It's all right.
There's a reason why we're blurring our backgrounds today.
Yes.
I'm also wondering, from a policy perspective, as we think through things like whistleblower policies and things like that, particularly now during this moment in time of great mass transformation, how are some of the things related to employee protections going to change because of what we've been experiencing?
Right.
And, how can we be a resource to companies to actually help them understand how they can evolve from point A to where we are now, point C, D, point E.
And to put a straight up racial ethnic filter on all your usage numbers, because we're saying women's health, but we're talking about all women. So, if it, the old saying, if you don't track it, it doesn't get done. A big underlying part of all this in the competition part of it, in the best practices and the opportunities for change is tracking everything. We want to know, and we, meaning your employees, want to know, we just want to be the conduit for it, that not only are women being served, but women of color are being served. What is happening there? Women of the professional, the manager, executive rank, your first line employees. What's happening all over there? So we believe in numbers.
Absolutely, Jennifer. And I think that brings up such a good point too, because when we think about, many times when companies are celebrated in the news for promoting women, they're promoting women into C-suite level positions, right?
Yes.
Not even realizing that, most women that have been furloughed or laid off across so many different industries are actually those frontline workers.
Yeah.
Right. And so what does it mean as we think of the company in its totality as it pertains to just, bringing women back into the workforce if they've been furloughed or laid off, or being able to rehire teams and departments again. And I think that's going to be interesting to see the dichotomies in some of that data too.
It's all about being an employer of choice. And we just think that health is going to be a major factor. We want to be paid, we want to be treated and respected right, but we want our health top of mind, all the forms of it. So we do see this as an advancement issue, a pipeline issue, a compensation issue, because if you feel burned out, unappreciated, if all, various aspects of your health are not only ignored, but you feel like they're, is it under threat or undervalued somehow, then you're going to leave. And it's hard right now, especially because, it's real hard to go job hunting right now. So, those companies that do step up and are trying and are doing best practices, amazing. And so, that's part of it. We keep talking about, like the numbers and the competition, but we want to say that, good on you. Good job. That's great. Can others learn from what you're doing? We would like to know. And so there is an honor part of this that we think it's so important, and we know there are companies doing great things. So we look forward to surfacing that and then spotlighting it.
Absolutely. I think that there's also a part of sometimes we just don't know. As human beings, we don't know what we don't know. Right. So we think that we may be doing the right thing, but we may not be doing the right thing, regardless of COVID, regardless of the pandemic, regardless of whatever else is happening in this unique moment in time, but just often it's human nature just not to know what we don't know. And I'm thinking, particularly as it pertains to employee resource groups, ERGs, like in many circumstances, those are worked out with tremendous success, but in other ways they haven't. And I also see this period of time in the sense of thinking about like how companies actually are supportive to employees at all different levels of the organization. How could things like employee resource groups not become so siloed in their, in their approach and in their conclusions, but really think about this moment in time to be able to provide women with different types of resources?
Yes, it's really It's a moment for companies to step up, and there are companies stepping up, and it'll be interesting to see. But, I mean, my goodness. And don't we all want to know? Because, what's the first thing everyone asks these days is, oh, so did you get your hair cut? So how was it?
I actually asked you that today before the show.
My husband went into his office and it was like, so what happened? How was it? Like no one's there, but he got dispensation to get this harder, this whole thing, like everybody, so what is it? We want to know. We also want to know it, talk about the great unknown. The great unknown is how exactly are we going back to work? So, we want to know too. We're nosy.
We're very nosy, and we do want to know. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, exactly. To hear everything.
So speaking of, we want to hear from you, let's talk about how our audience can become more involved and engaged. So today we have an incredible group of corporate executives and business owners and entrepreneurs. And I know that everyone out there wants to learn more about how they can get involved and learn more about, what we're doing. Let's talk through that.
Yes. Well, so we currently have, first we have a working group that is populated with medical professionals, HR and workplace health professionals, like corporate types, I think of.
We have quite a few corporate types. Some women involved in corporate social responsibility, media, HR, healthcare, PR.
And so we're tasking them to help with writing, and we're writing it, but like reviewing the assessment that we're going to finally come up with. We've gathered once, we'll gather again, and we've talked about the pillars. And we've just heard from them as very practically minded, because they've all dealt with the workplace, because Jan and I could go off and hey, what about cats? So try to, well.
Cats, we're not including cats?
I know, I'm sorry.
We can talk about that.
I literally have one sitting here. They're everywhere in my life. So that there's always room. We would love to have smart folks. Eventually, as this goes through, it'll be about framing the story. Like, what data did we produce? What does it say to you? What stories that come, that makes you think of this and that? That's hugely helpful. So we'd love that's an open invitation to just drop us a line, tell us that you're interested in being on that committee. And then Jan, we're also if you're connected to us in any way, we're putting you to work. The leadership, Mayshad leadership, we're tasking them with helping us make this a successful initiative. It's going to be, as much as we all know that this topic is important and, it gets us fired up and passionate, we will have to get funding for it. We will need to do a recruitment for companies to apply. Let's be honest, companies to apply for a lot of things. We need to be able to use our network to go out and convince companies that this is an important topic. It means a lot to women, the women they want to hire, the women that lead, their ranks. So we need that leadership component to help us make this successful, and then also help with amplifying it. And actually, then all of Mayshad is, please, when we have this, get your company to participate. Hey, what's happening with women's health? I'd love, did you see what's going on here? And then, did you see these findings? All of that helps make this a viable and sustainable program.
Jennifer, we have some questions from our audience already. This is exciting. Are you ready?
Yes. Bring it on. Woo.
Can you talk to us more about, are there specific parameters for companies by which they become eligible to participate in the assessment?
Yes, I think. So I am of the mindset that you want the door to be as wide open as possible to get as many companies in, because you want, the more the companies assess themselves, the more they learn right from the get-go. And they're always very interested in what the questions are. Of course they're interested, but they're interested in how we're defining women's health. So these are all good experiences for them, win or not win. Nobody loses, it's everybody's, think of all the companies that didn't apply in the first place. So I think the parameters, you keep them low. you want companies of a certain size, so maybe at least 500 employees. You want companies that are, not as much as we love small businesses, 12 employee companies are much different than 1,000 employees. So we want maybe say, we haven't landed on this, but that, then you want a basic, like, do they offer paid time off? You'd think that was a given. It's not. And so you may say something like, that they have to have some form of paid time off, because I think that's a time you need to be able to go to the doctors to do caregiving, or paid sick days, some basic signifiers that say yes. Because you also think when I put my content hat on as an editor, if we do a large chart and we want to say, how many of these great companies offer paid sick days, it better be 100% of them, so the threshold is part that, and so, that it's the basic, but also kind of setting the original tone. I love flexible work, that they offer some sort of flexible work as one of those little thresholds, but that's basically it's size and maybe two basic things to get them in. Then they compete.
That's the exciting part. So if my company doesn't meet the thresholds that you're just mentioning now, are there ways that I can still get involved?
Oh, for sure. I think definitely, there's, the basic of amplification, but I'd love to hear any thoughts on, your interpretation of what a company should be doing. That can get sucked into the application anyways, even though your company may be too small to compete, your experience is very valid, and it would be nice. It'd be lovely to hear that, because also, you set us up for the future too of, do we ever do something that's specifically tailored for small companies? Let's start thinking now about, well, we couldn't do X or we couldn't do Y. Anyway, I think your voice being heard is very helpful.
I think that's really important too, Jennifer. And also, this is something that you and I had discussed early on as well, is that knowing that there would be some sort of criteria by which companies are eligible to compete. But then, how do we include other companies that may be doing even more innovative things in this space too? And we also have sponsorship packages too for companies that want to get involved and be supportive of, of this initiative as well. And there are a lot of different opportunities in the sense of everything from, content sharing and speaking spots and memberships to Mayshad and a bunch of different things that we have
narratives
right now too.
Yeah, case studies. There's all that we could do, because certainly a huge company with 100,000 employees there are things they can learn, and also employees, the women and men, we all want to read those cool stories about those small, like, super progressive companies that are doing interesting things, and literally walk up and go, why don't we have? So I think, yes, there's ways to feature those interesting things related to, but not part of the list.
Next question. So if I'm understanding this correctly, there's an assessment process,
yes,
an assessment process, a judging process, an announcement and celebration process. And then is there also an opportunity, if my company submitted an application, to understand, where I rank next to, my peers?
For sure. Yes. So yes, there'll be the assessment, very quantifiable questions, 14, yes, no, you try to do that, because then we'll do a scoring algorithm and look for problems, because there's always, like, the way the data goes in and we clean it up. That essentially makes the list. And then, yes, content, celebration. But yes, there is, for sure, everybody who participates will get a very top line one page, like, here's how you ranked in these pillars, maybe a few sub pillars that are basically what we think are the key topic areas. And then we'll be able to do customizable benchmarking reports, you against the aggregate. Probably your company versus the whole. I'm just being realistic of how many companies will come in the first year, but yes, for definite. And then you could see question by question, high answer, low answer, median, and yours, and do the comparisons.
Will there be next question from the audience, will there be a certification that goes along with this, much like how the Rainforest Alliance certifies for sustainability?
I think, who are these smarty pants? I think that's
These are great questions.
A badge, like, yeah, we can, you're certified is a strong word, maybe verified or, yeah, but definitely, why not? We want these companies to shout it from the rooftops that they're doing good things.
Next question. These are great, everyone. Keep them coming. These are really good questions.
Okay.
Okay, so
loosening up now.
Watch out, everybody. Here we go. How does sustainability play into being a healthy place to work?
Now it's a very good, well, obviously it's a good question. It's a Mayshad question. That's what we have to determine, because yes, right. It is, can we bring it in? Can we, and then how deep do we go? Is it just a couple of questions? Is it a super deep? Yes, it can. I guess the short answer is yes. And then it's like how it manifests. That's that's where the hard work begins.
But I think it's also, we think about just the ESGs, the United Nations ESG principles. And, so much of it is about sustainability, but we also know that that's, it's such an interlocking nature of complex issues, right? So it's not just about climate change, it's about the interlocking nature by which everything else affects and is impacted by climate change. And that definitely plays out in the sense of like how employees experience the workplace.
Right, for sure. So yes, I think the answer is yes. The question as to how is, but all of it is a question of how at this point. So
this is a longer term projection for you, Jennifer. This is a good one.
Bring it on.
So when we think about health promotion, and we think about it through the traditional lens of the employer, which was largely about things like yoga, massages on site, flu shots, et cetera. And now we're moving a world toward where it's also about getting your temperature checked or, health, other sort of immediate health assessments. How will companies be able to get beyond that to really think through what does health promotion look like and what should it look like above and beyond just things that are checked off a box?
Well, first, I think the check off the box topics, that's basically a drop down menu. I mean, I'm getting into like survey, strategy right now, but it's just you get very few points, but they are points, but you get different benefit than the larger, deeper topics that we're talking about. But definitely you should get credit because a lot of companies aren't doing, they don't have an on-site medical place. They're not bringing in people to do blood pressure or yoga classes or the like. So, yes, they get that, but literally their check the boxes are check the box. So the lifting up of promoting health. So that's where we get into things. That's the complication of the application in that we're talking about the communication aspect, we're talking about the policy aspect, we're talking about access and usage. So I think that's how we get at it, is that we're taking a bunch of strands and bringing them and stitching them together. Because there's no one question that's going to say, are you doing a good job promoting health and making it a top line issue? Yes, you win. So I think that's where and then it's incumbent upon us to take the data beyond the scoring algorithm, but to look at it and say, look at this story that is rising up through this data. This data is telling us X and Y. Oh my goodness. And now we need to take that and build a story of both a narrative and like a marching orders. Like, we believe that what's missing is X, Y, Z. We say our membership is saying we don't see X or we want Y. And all of that's that's a long answer to a long question of like bringing the stitching together.
I like how you said that. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. One question: I would love to learn more about how to get involved as a working committee member or as a Mayshad leader. Who do I talk to? You talk to us. But no, in all seriousness, in answer to that question, please contact Jennifer or myself to learn more about how you two can get involved at the individual level.
Is our contact info like floating around? How will they know?
I think David is putting our info at the end of this episode. Yeah. And if he doesn't, we'll make sure that he get that up in the edited version too.
All right.
But you can, Jennifer, we find you at, what is your email address?
Jennifer, JENNIFER at Jenwork.com, and it's JENN work, WORK.com. And yourself, Jan?
It's so funny. I was just trying to remember my email address. j.doms, DAHMS, at mayshadgroup.com. And you can always learn more about Join Mayshad at joinmayshad.com, obviously, too. Okay, so last question. This is very inspirational. So Jennifer and Jan, what would you ultimately like to see happen from this in year number one? And then how do you see it evolving over time?
From the get-go, I would love to have 100 companies, or I would love to have a list of 100 companies. I mean, that's really shooting for the moon, but I would love to have so many companies. We're a little overwhelmed with the data management. That's what I would like from just a hardcore success. What I'd really love is to raise the voice of women and their concerns about the workplace, both at home and at work. I just feel like this conversation we're having right now about reopening the economy, it's already forgetting the fact that, schools, that we haven't decided what's happening with school. Like that intersection is already a problem. But what is exactly are we asking women and men too, but I just don't feel like that story is quite up there yet. It's more about, who's wearing a mask and who's not wearing a mask. And when are we reopening the economy? And I just feel there's way more to this conversation. So if we have a role in shaping the conversation about, hey, this is what employees need. This is what we want. This is what we need to feel comfortable and healthy at work. To me, that would be a great success. How about you, Jan?
I love that answer, Jennifer, because it so well encapsulates everything that we've been talking about for the last 8 months on this. No, not 8 months, 6 months, 6 months. Yeah. For me, I think in this moment in time, I really would love in year number one for companies to understand the complexity of gender, honestly, and to understand that there's not one woman's experience in the workplace, nor is there necessarily one man's experience in the workplace. But we often come up with these binary constructs in the sense of how we think about gender, how we think about race, how we think about class, how we think about ethnicity, without really fully understanding that women are very complex, not because we're complex creatures, which I think we are, but that because we have many different roles that we play at many different times and many different identities that we fulfill as well. And I think that there's a lot of nuance in the sense of how companies can be more responsive, particularly in this moment in time, but as we go forward to whatever that new future looks like, and for companies to really understand that, number one, gender is complex, but then also number two, the ways in which they may have been a little short-sighted in how they think about ensuring inclusion and doing diversity differently. Yeah. And creating opportunities for there to be more inclusive spaces where everyone's around the table having conversations, and that we're really truly not just giving lip service to difference, but really understanding and appreciating difference and using that to a company's benefit, honestly, and really thinking through, like, how can companies really position the work that they do, no matter if it's around issues of sustainability or gender or diversity or inclusion or corporate social responsibility or any of those things that sometimes are just given lip service to, like, how do they really embody that at the strategic level? Yeah. And I know that that's a lot for year one, but at the end of the year.
Wait a minute, hold it. Take that down.
But at the end of the year, I hope that, I guess, in summary, that, companies actually say, wow, Jennifer and Jan, like, you really helped me to think through this differently.
Yeah, that would be, yeah. Every time we want that to happen, we want that to happen over and over again. Exactly. And that women feel heard. So that's what I'd love.
And we also want to hear from you. Like, what would you like to see come from this project as well? So please, please, please reach out to us, reach out to Jennifer, reach out to myself. visit us at joinmayshad.com. Jennifer, thank you so much. We've launched. This is
yay! Thank you. Very exciting. Thank you. Thank you, Mayshad. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Neza. I mean, without her guidance, none of this happens. So
No,
it's very good.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing that. And you're right, Jennifer. Like every conversation we have with the wonderful women and men on our committee and with Neza, and we're really truly using all of our experiences and all the very diverse industries that we all come from in the sense of how this really gets shaped up and finalized. So please, everyone, stay tuned for more. If you would like more information about how you and your company can become involved, again, please make sure to contact us, and please join us on, let's see, what is today? Today's only Tuesday. After the July 4th holiday, please join us on Thursday at 4 p.m. for our Women in Money show. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Have a great afternoon.